Hello, kia ora, namaste, assalamu alaikum, or pyar badi, sat sri akal ji to everyone. I hope everyone is well and having a good weekend. Today is a very special day. I've got a very special guest on tonight. Um, he is known as the immigration or the migrant savior. He is well known in the community for any immigration related issues. He has also done a lot in the past, not just now. He's done a lot many, many years ago. And he's quite a celebrity in our Indian community. And he's won a lot of campaigns, individual campaigns, and group campaigns. So it's a pleasure to have our guest today on with us on YVWS. To support this channel, please share, like, and subscribe this channel, where we will be doing awareness videos, spreading knowledge about immigration and other issues. And let me introduce you all to the one man only in immigration-related issues, Mr. Alastair McClymont.
Hi, Cher. Thank you very much for having me. And you were far too kind in your introduction. I feel that I've only really contributed a small bit, and it's really people like yourself who do all the hard work.
You've come into my comment section a lot over the past few months, and I've heard a lot in about you, where you've done a lot of campaigns in the past, and when I wasn't even part of the movement. So let's just kickstart. My first question I want to ask you is, do you want to introduce yourself? I know you don't need to introduce yourself, but do you want to introduce yourself and your contact details?
Well, yeah, let me explain to you the reason why I do get involved in these campaigns, okay? So I've been an immigration lawyer now for 29 years. My background was that I came from a very sort of political background. My stepfather, when I was growing up, was a politician in the Values Party, which basically preceded the Greens Party. So growing up as a kid, we as a family would go to anti-apartheid protests. We would, be involved in a lot of sort of political campaigns. And when I started working as an immigration lawyer 29 years ago, the immigration environment was completely different from what it is today. And back in those days, the only people really doing immigration law were basically human rights lawyers who also got into immigration. So what we had back in those days when I started 29 years ago was people who came from a human rights background who did immigration work. But now the nature of immigration has changed completely, and the nature of the immigration lawyers and the immigration advisors have changed completely, where it's now become more like a business. And like everything with immigration, it's all about a business and how much money you can make. But that's not my background. My particular interest in India came from the fact that the very first time I traveled to India was in the 1980s, which just shows how old I am. So when I was about 22 years old, I graduated from Otago University with a major in Indian history. So at the University of Otago, and my lecturer at the University of Otago was a world expert in Sikh history. So I traveled to India in 1989. I spent about 7 months in India and became obsessed about India and everything Indian from then. And since then, I've been back to India probably 25 times. I came back from India the first time. I obtained a law degree. And now I've obtained philosophy degrees, and in particular in political philosophy. So my interest in immigration and the immigration issues comes from a combination of these things. It comes from a really particular interest in India and in Asia, comes from an interest in the history of Asia and India, comes from the political philosophy, and it comes from a human rights background in immigration. So really what I'm doing as an immigration lawyer is really trying to fulfill those personal interests and stand up for the rights of migrants. Migrant rights are human rights, as you say.
Definitely. Yeah, because you've been quite famous in the media too, with with Daman's case, how they got a lot of pressure from the media, and yeah, so Daman ended up getting his residency, which was great for him. Um, I just want to ask you, can you just give us one scenario, just a short scenario of, because we know the current immigration issues what are going on right now, but has there ever been in the past similar situations like these where migrants have had the opportunity to come into this country and are being left stranded, not only by the employer but the immigration itself? Has there ever been something like that in the past?
Well, no, but perhaps before answering that question, I can give you a very brief history of immigration policy in New Zealand so you can understand why this really is something new that hasn't existed before. So prior to 1987, we had an old Immigration Act in which basically the government would choose migrants to come and live here as residents. Okay.
Yep.
Not bringing them in as temporary workers, but bringing them in as residents. But they would choose which nationality they would come from. And they would generally be white Europeans. Then that changed in 1987 under the new Immigration Act, where it became colourblind. There were no nationalities or, preferred nationalities. And what happened from about 1987 through to the early 2000s was the vast majority of migrants were coming in as residents. So, for example, under the old general skills category, people could apply from India, and a lot were applying from India at that time, based on having a qualification, some work experience, and their age. So you didn't have a connection with the job offers.
Yep.
And then that gradually started to change over time. So immigration policy moved away from being a policy to bring in New Zealanders to live here permanently to a policy very much like what you have in the Gulf states, like in Dubai and these sorts of places, where we have temporary workers. And that's really a new thing for New Zealand, particularly over the last 20 years or so. But the problem we have in New Zealand, of course, is that we're at the bottom of the world and our wage rates are not as high as other Western countries. So we have to encourage people to apply and come here. And that is the promise of residency that we dangle in front of people to get them to come. But really, the government has no intention of allowing these people to stay as residents. They need to dangle the possibility of becoming residents, but they don't really want them to become residents because the economic policy that dominates all government thinking now is about using temporary migrants as an economic tool to do the kind of work that they want to limit the rights of those workers in the workplace. So that they can use them and abuse them and recycle them without giving them the opportunity of settling. And that is now what dominates immigration policy. And it's not something we had 20 years ago or more. So the answer to your question is no. This is basically a new thing. And of course, accompanying that change of philosophy of what immigration policy is for is the rise of exploitation and fraud and all of these other things. So when I started 29 years ago, the cases of exploitation that would come were very, very minor, very small. It wasn't much of an issue because it didn't really happen that much. The more and more and more the government moved towards having a system of temporary migrants who we would recycle, accompanying that was the rise in exploitation and the rise in fraud. And they come with each other, which is why I've become sort of well known for saying that the biggest exploiter in this country is the New Zealand government.
Yeah, it is, yeah, because when you look at it, it's the government who are allowing all this to happen, and this migrants being brought up in high numbers right now, especially under the accredited work employer visa. There's a high number of migrants who have entered here with no future, and they just left stranded, and it's very disappointing. What are your thoughts on visas being attached to single employers?
Yeah, so there's one thing that I probably disagree a little bit with people like yourself, and I've mentioned this, and I'm not saying disagreeing that you've got it wrong, but disagreeing in terms of what the root cause of the problem is. Many people talk about the root cause as being bad employers. I don't believe that's the case. I believe that, yes, there are lots of bad employers. I believe that bad employers are exploiting migrant workers, but I believe that this is built into the system, because this is what the system is designed to do, is to have temporary workers who don't have the same rights as New Zealand workers. They're not free to sell their labour to whoever they want to sell it to. They're restricted in their workplace, their job. They've got a whole lot of other restrictions, and that in itself is exploitative, because it takes advantage of people who will buy the opportunities to get into those jobs, either through coming as students or the buying of jobs, and then they're tied to these employers and they don't have the freedom to move. And that in itself is exploitative. So it's the immigration policies which exploit the migrant workers, but it's the individual employers who take advantage of those opportunities and take it to a much further degree by really, accelerating that process of the exploitation of the individuals. But it's the system itself which exploits the migrant workers.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because I know you've mentioned it quite a few times in my comment section when I say the root cause. Why I say the root cause is, as you know, like, I haven't been in this field as long as yourself, and this is, every time I see something like this, it's like a worse situation for me. And I know you come with a lot of experience, but if they decide to deattach these visas and, for example, attach it to like a region, or would that help?
Yeah, absolutely, it would help. But what it doesn't change is the fact that New Zealand has now become reliant on recycling temporary workers by dangling the possibility of residence to those people, bringing them into the country, quite often with them paying a lot of money for either study or for employers, and then getting rid of them after 3 years and recycling them for other people to come in. It doesn't change that problem, but it does give the individual workers who are here the freedom to escape from the very worst of the employers. And I do think that if there is a change of government this year, I think there's a reasonably good possibility we may see this decoupling of workers from the visas. Under previous Labour immigration spokespeople, they have not had much interest in doing this, but currently the Labour immigration spokesperson, Phil Twyford, is really from more of the left of the Labour Party. So he and the Greens seem to be in a lot more agreement about a lot of the fundamental issues. So if there is a change of government, and with both Phil Twyford and Ricardo Menendez-March being in there as immigration spokespeople, I think there's a pretty good chance that something may actually change and give some relief to a lot of these people who are tied to individual employers.
Yeah, I'm also hearing a lot, and I will be sending an invitation to Phil Twyford to see if he can come on and talk about it. I've just got Jatinder Singh. He's asked, I got my visa in 2025 after rule changed. Jatinder, can you be more specific on your question, please? Okay. And just try putting it just in one. I can't even sponsor my family, and they are away from me for 3 years. I have 2 kids, and I'm in truck lines, a class 5 driver. I can get my IELTS results, but I'm not in category of residency pathway.
So this is a perfect example, absolutely perfect example of what I'm talking about New Zealand relying on temporary workers. But when you're relying on temporary workers, part of this whole system, having an immigration system relying on temporary workers, is you don't want them to get settled. Part of not allowing them to get settled is by making it really difficult to bring family over here. So the government policies try and create as many roadblocks as possible for the workers to bring family, to bring kids, to be able to, sponsor them to come, to be able to get residency through residency pathways, whether it's because of the English requirements or the wage requirements or the skill requirements. So truck drivers is a really good example of how the government tries to encourage people to come over here with the possibility of residence, but they really have no intention of allowing truck drivers to become residents, and they try and cut them off from their family, cut them off from their connections back at home, just to try and recycle them every 3 years and not allow them to settle as members of our community. And this is a perfect example of what he's talking about. So I know he's going to be looking for a solution, but really the solution is only going to be in people like us talking about why do we have immigration policies that want to just recycle people and use them as economic units rather than as actual human beings who have a right to have a family and to settle in the communities in which they choose to live. That's the conversation that we should be having, particularly in an election year.
Exactly. Yeah, see, there's another brother here. He's saying, my question is that a standard of English in transport sector, which is very high, can it be reduced?
Yep. So this is again another one. So Ricardo, who I know you've had on your show before. This is Ricardo Menendez March, who's the Green Party immigration spokesperson. He has been trying to push very hard on this issue in particular, to reduce the English language level in particular for truck drivers, which will then give them options at least to look at obtaining residency. And we've seen here that the National Coalition government are not interested in that at all. They're quite happy to reduce the English language levels for multi-millionaires who invest money in here because it's all about money for them. But in terms or that actually keep the country going, that deliver the food to our supermarkets, that allow us to live our lives. They don't want these people to stay, which is why they're going to leave these English language levels high while we currently have this government that we have. And really, if you want to reduce the English language levels for truck drivers, we need to change a government.
Definitely. I remember we were at a protest and Mike Treen, he mentioned about recycling migrants. That really stuck to me. That, it really it put a hole in my heart when you use that word recycling migrants. And you're quite active on social media, and you've seen all this hate being spread. It's election year this year, and it seems that Indians are bearing all of the force of anti-migrant rhetoric. Why is it Indians?
Yes, very controversial answer to this question. Every country has an ethnicity that they target. So we see in America, it's Mexicans, okay? In a lot of European countries, it'll be people from Syria, Middle Eastern countries, or North African countries. In New Zealand and Australia, it's quite often Indians. So you have to go back again to this whole idea that temporary migrants that are coming here to work are not human beings. They're recyclable economic units. That's how the system is designed. Now, in a democracy like New Zealand, if you're going to inflict some sort of harm or restrictions on people, you need to be involved in a process of dehumanization in order to justify doing what we're doing. So we have a system now where we have around 100,000 people living in this country on temporary visas who we treat differently than other people. How do you justify treating people differently like this and depriving them of the ability to invite their parents to come, to bring their partners to come, for their kids to go to school? You have to justify it in some way, and you justify it by dehumanizing them. You create this idea that somehow that they're less ethical, that they're less moral, that they're going to infringe on our New Zealand culture, that they're a risk, that they're a danger. So all of the anti-Indian migrant sentiment you get is a reflection of the fact that Indians make up a large number of these temporary migrants. And in order to justify the treatment, they have to be seen as somehow as less human. So
Mm.
all of the anti-migrant rhetoric comes out as part of that whole bigger picture of how do we justify treating migrants in this way. We have to, always have negative news stories. It's
Yeah.
always got to be that they're a risk, that they're a danger, that it's, taking away our culture, that they're rapists, that they, have fraudulent documentation. All of this negativity, which then justifies, deport them all, get rid of all the migrants, deprive them of their appeal rights. You can't have one without the other. So the kind of anti-migrant laws and policies that are coming out, you would never be able to have that if the target was white European migrants. All right? The country would be jumping up and going absolutely crazy. So,
Yep.
but when you target someone else with a different culture, different language, then it makes it a lot easier. You've got to make it look like that culture and those languages is something which is a risk to the country. So in America, we talk about Donald Trump. He talks about the Mexicans are coming. They're sending the rapists and the murderers. You see this in the United Kingdom, and you see this in Europe, where they talk about crime, and they're bringing, crime, and they're rapists, and what are those grooming gangs, and all this kind of stuff. Now, the statistics and the facts show a completely different story.
Yeah.
In America, the people who, the Mexicans and the Latinos have the lowest crime rate out of any other ethnic group. Same within the United Kingdom. And it's the same here in New Zealand, that in terms of the actual criminal offences that occur by ethnicity, Asian migrants are the lowest group. But the media and the politicians will make you think that they are a huge risk to the country, thereby justifying the treatment you have of them in our immigration policies.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's because for the past few months, or even I can say over a year now, there is a lot of hate being spread, and I strongly feel that Indians itself are getting targeted.
Yep.
And especially if you look at comments from politicians, Shane Jones, making that comment, it's just it's giving normal citizens the opportunity to speak freely. When politicians can do this, obviously normal people can too. I've got a brother here. He's saying, like, I've taken the exam 7 times, but still got 6 scores, and I have spent thousands of dollars. What should I do now?
Yeah, I mean, the same thing. This is why it's difficult. This is why we have like an IELTS test at 6.5, which is an academic level. Now, there are a lot of New Zealanders who leave school at the age of 15 and 16 in this country who are never going to get 6.5 on an IELTS test, okay? So as an immigration policy, we're demanding that people like, truck drivers speak university level English, which a lot of people leaving school can't even speak, So this is not because, we need them to have this level of English to be, productive members of the community. It's a way of making it seem like we want these people into the country, but when they're here, then you cut off the residency pathways. So the answer to the question, what should I do now? Well, get out there and encourage a change of government so you have parties who will actually understand and appreciate the importance of people in this country doing the work and believe that they should be part of our communities and providing residency pathways for them. That's what you should do.
Exactly.
Because this government's not going to change it. This government will not do anything.
Yeah, I've just got an announcement to make too. We're also there's immigration organizations, migrant organizations who are meeting up next week, and we're going to be planning to campaign hard for this. And here's another controversial question: should we have any expectations from this government? From me, it's a big no.
Look, there's some very, very dangerous things going on with this government.
Yeah.
Okay. Some very dangerous things that are being hidden. Well, I wouldn't really say deliberately hidden, but the media is not paying any attention to them. Very few people are paying any attention to them, but it's a very, very significant law changes currently going through Parliament, which are going to make it possible, for example, for immigration officers and police to go into workplaces, particularly where Indians are working, basically stop people, demand that they show their identification, demand that they say what their nationality is, their country of birth is, And even if these people are New Zealand citizens and New Zealand residents, immigration officers will have the power to arrest and detain them until they prove that they're citizens and residents. Now, this is never, ever going to happen to people like myself because I'm the right colour, okay?
Yeah.
They're going to use this law to target workplaces, and they're going to use it to target migrant workplaces. So construction industry, particularly around Auckland, where they'll be targeting that for the Chinese. Horticulture industry, Bay of Plenty, Waikato, South Auckland, they'll be targeting those for the Indians. You've got other nationalities like, Southeast Asians, Vietnamese, that sort of thing, that do a lot of stuff like, tiling kind of work, painting kind of work. They'll be targeting those. Every one of these sorts of industries have a particular ethnic group which, dominates. And those are the workplaces that are going to be targeted. So, yes, you should have expectations from the government, but those expectations are that we're going to be moving very fast towards an American system where government immigration officers are going to be able to stop people and demand that they identify themselves and prove that they're legally entitled to be in this country at the risk of being arrested and detained. That's where this government is taking us.
That's really scary, Alastair. That's when you're saying this, I've literally got goosebumps. I've read it, but just hearing it from a person.
I'll tell you a story. I got contacted earlier this year by an American immigration lawyer, and he was looking at migrating to New Zealand because he was afraid for himself and his family because of the Trump government. I asked him one day, I said, how did America ever get to the stage where immigration officers are executing US citizens in the street and getting away from it? He said it started 20 years ago with small incremental law changes and nobody paid any attention to it.
Yeah.
There was a small change in the law and everybody said, it's just a small change, don't worry about it. 6 months later, there'd be another one, then there'd be another one, and then there'd be another one. 20 years later, he woke up to the news that immigration officers are executing US citizens in the street. That's how it happened. That's why we have these law changes that are happening now, and the minister says, these are just small little minor changes, don't worry about it. Well, we had small minor changes last year, and the year before that, and the year before that. We're going to wake up 20 years from now where if you're, the color of your skin or your name makes it look like you might be a migrant, your own family are going to be at risk with these law changes. And that's what's happening now in America, is you've got US citizens of Mexican origin who are being stopped, arrested, and detained in the street because they look Mexican. That's where those laws are going to lead. So when you have people of Indian origin who are running for the National Party or the ACT Party and are supporting these sorts of laws, they are putting their own children and grandchildren at risk in the future of being stopped, arrested, and detained in the street because of the way they look. Exactly. Now you look at the type of abuse that New Zealand-born Indians get sometimes. Look at the guy who became the CEO of Air New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
Now, if he was a migrant from the UK, everybody would have said, great, we're going to get someone with some English experience in, to run our airline, fantastic. You get an Indian guy in with an Indian name, even though he's born here and a New Zealand citizen, and you look at the comments in the media, even in the mainstream left-leaning media like Radio New Zealand, they had to stop the comment section within 12 hours because of the amount of racial abuse towards this guy simply because of his name and the color of his skin. Yeah. And that's where these law changes are going to lead us.
Yeah, it's what I don't understand. We see, it's election year, and I've been seeing a lot of candidates being selected from the Indian community, but it's heartbreaking to see that it's the parties which are far right they're selecting to be part of.
Yeah.
And I'm like, come on, like you said, they themselves are migrants. They have family, they have friends who are Indians, And I don't think it's not just going to be Indians, it's going to be overall migrants who are going to be targeted from all these, from what you're telling me. But it's really scary. It's really scary, um, the direction we're headed to. What is the solution for this, Alistair?
Well, first of all, we need to start talking about it publicly.
Yeah.
But just one thing before I talk about that, what we're talking about now is about, Indians and other migrants being targeted. There is a direct connection between that and the type of work that migrants are doing. And if you go back in New Zealand history, right, you'll see that they always accompany each other. So back in the late 1800s, they had to bring in Chinese workers, particularly in the gold fields, okay, to do a lot of that sort of work. But when they were bringing them in to do that, there was a whole lot of anti-Chinese rhetoric coming in, right? After the Second World War in the 1940s and 1950s, there was a shortage of manual labor in the cities. And so what they did was they encouraged Māori, who were predominantly living in the rural areas, they encouraged them to come into the cities to work. But then that started up a whole anti-Māori settlement amongst a whole lot of people living in the cities towards the Māori who were coming into the cities to work. Then in the 1970s, there was another economic boom. They didn't have enough workers, so they brought in Pacific Islanders. When they no longer became needed, then there was a whole lot of anti-Pacific stuff going on. This is when you had the Dawn raids. And now you see the same thing again with the Indians and other Asian nationalities. They're being brought in to do the work, but then you decide you don't want them anymore. Then you have all of that anti-Indian, anti-Asian rhetoric. So it's a pattern that has repeated itself over more than 100 years. So this is what really upsets me when you get Indian migrants who talk about, who say bad things about, Māori or Pacifica or anyone else. You're all in the same boat. You're all victims of the same economic system. And you're all being screwed by the same economic system in the same way. These are your brothers.
Yeah.
But then it's kind of like this racist shit that, some of them come out with. It's just, I can't tolerate it. But what do you do about it was your other question. Well, the first thing is you need to start talking about it and talking about what this immigration system really is about and what it's really trying to do. And there's so few people that will actually talk about this publicly and try and change things. Particularly in politics. So, the current immigration system where we just talk about, we'll increase the fines for the workers and, we'll adjust the numbers. You're talking inside a small box about what immigration policy is. Nobody talks outside of that box. In politics, there's only one politician out of 120 MPs who will ever talk outside of that box, and that's Ricardo. From the Greens. Everybody else just talks about, let's increase the fines for workers and let's, increase or decrease the numbers a little bit. Nobody thinks outside of the box. The first thing we can do then is talk more openly about why do we have an immigration system? What are we trying to do with it? What is the purpose of this immigration system? And is this really the right way to run an immigration system? And that's really what I'm trying to do with my stuff. I write blogs, I publish stuff on my own website, on my Facebook groups, and I talk publicly in the media and with people like yourself to try and get people to think outside of the box about an immigration system.
Yeah, I think I've chosen this time to launch my channel too, because I think now is the right time. Like you said, we need to talk about it. We need to aware people of what's actually happening, because obviously, in our community, people don't go into that depth of reading policies or pulling up websites and reading about it. It's just hearsay. If they hear something, they'll hear half the news and they'll believe it. But what's happening in those rooms, what's happening in those caucuses, we need to let everyone know. And it's time for us to take some serious action. And like you said, our Pacifica brothers and sisters, social media is full of them. We're just fighting against each other. And like you said, we're brothers and sisters. We should be close to each other. We should be supporting one another. Yet the way this is designed, we're all fighting against each other.
And that's deliberate. So people like Shane Jones and Winston Peters do a lot in that. They do not want Māori to see their own history in what's happening with current immigration. They don't want them to suddenly realize that they're being exploited in the same way. So they will go to Māori and say, all of your problems are because of the migrants coming in.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's a deliberate strategy, is to keep the people who have the same interests, to keep them divided from each other by getting them to try and blame each other. But, the Indian migrants of today have the exact same history as, Pacifica in the 70s, Māori in the 1950s and 60s, and the Chinese going right back into the 1800s when they're brought in as gold miners and as laborers. It's all the same history.
Yeah, I've got a brother here. He's saying, "Kia ora here. I know many persons who already spend thousands of dollars on exams, like tens of thousands of dollars, for 13 or 14 times." And this, like, I've got a group of 800 odd members from transport sector. When they first got done their test, they were sitting on 4.55, sorry. And they're reaching up to 6, but to get that 0.5, they're really struggling.
Yeah.
It's like impossible for them.
Yep.
Visa fees are going up so high, just making money for migrants, and they just don't want them to get residency.
Yep.
Sad. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. Now, so this is really good, because what, comments like this are showing that people are actually understanding what this system actually is, and that it's a deliberate thing. This is not accidental that people are unable to meet the English language requirements. It's not accidental that they have to spend all of their money on visa fees. This is a deliberate part of the immigration system, is to keep these migrant workers down.
Yeah. I have heard you say before that NZ government is the biggest exploiter of migrants.
Mm-hmm.
That seems counterintuitive, as the news is full of stories of employers who are exploiting migrants. Can you explain why it is that you say that government is the biggest exploiter of migrants? Can you just elaborate on that one?
Yeah, because I sort of mentioned that before. So I don't mean a direct exploiter like an employer. What I mean more as an enabler. Mm-hmm. So, we talk, in criminal law, you have offences of aiding and abetting. So a crime takes place, but somebody is there behind the scenes that is enabling it to happen. So the way that immigration policy is designed basically encourages, in particular, those employers to get involved in that sort of thing. Now, we talked about the AEWV, and you will know from recent history that I think it was around 2022, 2023, under the previous Labour government, there was pressure. I'm going to use this as an example. So there was pressure to get migrant workers back into the country to rebuild after COVID. So what they basically did is they created the AEWV scheme, which had an accreditation element, which meant that employers who were not making any money, who could not, employ anyone because they were just not profitable, were all of a sudden able to self-declare on an online form that they, were financially viable. They would then apply for a job check, and they'd get 20 job check tokens, and they'd sell them on the open market for $30,000 a pop. Mm-hmm. Now, the government created that policy. Now, they were warned multiple times by multiple organisations that this is going to be a disaster. They were warned by the Law Society. They were warned by lawyers, even by Immigration New Zealand themselves, that all this was going to be a disaster. But the government said, no, we're going to do it. We're going to do it because we want people into the country to rebuild after COVID. And they created that system, and the amount of people that got screwed out of money by employers, by immigration advisors, by immigration lawyers, selling jobs on the open market that didn't exist. That was all the government. They created that, and they knew what was going to happen, but they went ahead and created it anyway. So we had mass exploitation that happened after that period, and it was all created by the New Zealand government's immigration policies when they knew damn well that was going to happen. So they enabled that exploitation. Employers just took advantage of the opportunity that was presented to them by the government. So it's the government that's the exploiter, because they're the ones that create the policies that enable the exploitation.
Yeah, that's true. And I think now the governments are playing like, they're saying, oh, we're recruiting more immigration officers or recruiting more people to get these employers who are exploiting their workers, blah, blah, blah. It's just,
But read through the small print though, because
yeah.
not only is it creating immigration officers to investigate exploitation, it's also
And
creating immigration officers to go into those workplaces to
yeah,
harass the migrant workers and demand that they show their identification. That's what we talked about before. Look at the small print of where that money is actually going. That is where that money is going to be going, just in the same way that the Trump government pumped in millions of dollars into ICE agents to go and harass migrants in places like Minneapolis.
yeah, like you said, I think it's like, these little changes. We may not be noticing them now, but later down the track, like your friend said, that
Yep,
it was a
we're gonna
little.
wake up one day and think, how the hell did we get to this situation?
Mm. Yeah, it's especially for a country, like New Zealand. It's a small country. I've been here since 1989, and I've yeah, and but like what New Zealand was when we came here, and I'm comparing it to now. There's a big shift. It's not the right shift.
Yeah, look, I started working in immigration in 1997,
Hmm.
and I probably for the first 10 years, I'd never even heard of migrant worker exploitation.
Mm.
I mean, it just didn't exist. I just never came across it.
Yep.
And then gradually we started to hear these little stories coming in. And now it's like 10 times a day.
Yeah. It's
Now,
yeah. It's
now that's not just down to, it's not just like suddenly overnight employers became bad people.
mm,
It's that in 1997, the migrants predominantly came in on resident visas.
yeah.
So if they were in a workplace and the employer said, you have to recycle your wages, the migrant would say, well, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
It's not off. And they go and get another job
Yeah.
because they got a resident visa. But now they're tied on this goddamn work visa. And it's not just a matter of, uncoupling the visa to the employer. Because what do you do if the employer says, hey, look, to get residency, you need to be paid $35 an hour. Look, I'm willing to pay you $35 an hour, but you need to give some money back to me, and you need to work some extra hours, and that way you can get residency. So even if the employee, the migrant, had an open visa, they may think, oh my God, nobody else is offering me $35 an hour. Here's an opportunity I've got to get residency. So
Mm.
you're not going to suddenly free all these people because they're still trying to meet those policy requirements of doing the kind of job that you're supposed to be doing as a skilled job, or getting paid the right amount of money or the right number of hours, or all of those sorts of things. So decoupling is only just one part of the solution.
Mm. Hey, Alastair, you might remember when we were campaigning for amnesty for overstayers a couple of years ago, or yeah, a few years ago. Um, what is amnesty for overstayers looking like right now for you? Is it possible?
Well, we know that National Act in New Zealand First are not even going to think
Never
about it.
know.
Obviously, the Greens are all for it.
Yeah.
Now, under the last election, Andrew Little was the immigration minister. His proposal was that people who'd been in the country for 15 years
Hmm.
would have an opportunity for residency.
Yeah.
Now, 15 years is better than nothing, but it's a very small number that have been here that long.
Mm.
Now, a couple of times I've asked Phil Twyford whether they're going to have the same policy. He hasn't answered that yet. Maybe that's something that you can do if you can get him into your podcast.
Yeah.
But I suspect that he needs to get approval from the Labor caucus first for an amnesty. Personally, I'm a big fan of it.
Okay.
I'm a big supporter of the amnesty, and I think it's something we should start campaigning about. I think that what I can do to contribute to that is to sort of talk about why we should be having this amnesty. And I think, first of all, we should not call it an amnesty, because an amnesty implies that you're going to let someone off from breaking the law. I don't see overstayers as breaking the law. In fact, I don't even like the term overstayer.
Yeah.
I prefer to use undocumented migrants, and rather than amnesty, I prefer to talk about things like, documenting the undocumented migrants or normalizing their immigration status, to try and take away that feeling that there's somehow some sort of criminality involved. My fundamental belief about these amnesties is that when you're living in a community of people, you're connected with your work colleagues, with your neighbors, with your community. You're a part of that community, and that takes primacy above everything else. That is the single most important thing, is that community unity. And New Zealand is in a very special situation. We're different from the United States. We're different from Europe because we are surrounded by thousands of kilometers of open ocean. We can control our borders.
Mm.
The reason we have people here who are here unlawfully is because we use and reuse and recycle temporary migrants to come to work, and then we try and get rid of them and replace them with a new lot. If we didn't have that system, if we only selected migrants to come in as residents, you wouldn't have exploitation, you wouldn't have the fraud, and you wouldn't have the need for an amnesty in anywhere near the way that you do now. So if you want to have an amnesty to legalize people and you don't want the numbers to increase, you've got to have it in conjunction with a change in the immigration policies, which stop having hundreds of thousands of people on temporary visas who are entering into exploitative relationships or remaining here unlawfully to try and find a pathway to residency. Actually give them a genuine pathway to residency instead.
Yep.
And they're not going to have the same problem.
Yeah, the reason I asked this question, Alastair, is because, with this accredited work visa, I know that in the coming months, there's a lot of visas which are going to expire in the coming months, and there's, especially from the transport sector, they're working day and night to get this bloody 6.5 score, but it's impossible for them. They can't, like I said, they can reach up to 6. That's the maximum that they're getting. And I've come to know of some migrants who are workers who have 15 times they've given their tests. And he's like, I can't get that 0.5. I just don't understand why,
Yeah.
And if his visa expires and he doesn't find a new employer, he or she is gonna become an overstayer or undocumented migrant, And there's going to be another spike. So I'm just thinking ahead, because I know it's these migrant workers. I always say to them, look, we need to come together all on one platform and fight together, unity. Before
before you say that, and I know, if every single migrant who is on a temporary visa in this country stopped work tomorrow and went on strike and went in March, there would be changes immediately, because the country would just come to a standstill, an absolute standstill. How do you get 100,000 people on temporary visas to just say, fuck this, we're stopping work and we're striking?
Yeah. I know, this is what I like. I like the staunch. I like it, what you've just said, but I don't know. It's really hard for me to make workers from my community, the Indian community, understand this, and I think they're just full of this fear, and it's false promises, and they keep falling for those false promises again and again. And honestly, they're just too scared to take any action.
Yeah, and that fear is deliberate. So that is a part of the whole system. And that's these law changes that are coming in are designed to ensure that migrant workers in these industries stay in fear constantly. The new fear is that what happens if I'm stopped by an immigration officer and I don't have my passport with me? Am I going to be arrested and detained? So there was an employer told me a story a couple of months ago. He's at it was a farm, right? He had 20 people there working on his farm. Every single one of them had a visa enabling them to work, right? Immigration officers turned up. Out of those 20 workers, 15 of them ran away, right? Okay. When they eventually came back at the end of the day, he asked one of them, an Indian guy who was a New Zealand citizen, he said, why the hell did you run away? You're a citizen. He said, the registration on my car had expired and I was scared. So fear is just part of it. You've got to keep these people in fear. So even people who are lawfully here are going to be afraid. Another story, there was immigration officers and the police stopped a car on the way to workplace, and they said, show us your identification, show us your passports. They all got out of the car and they stood there for half an hour showing them their identification. There was a resident, there was a citizen, and there were two people on work visas. Now, if that was me and the police had stopped me and I was not driving the car and they asked for my identification, I would have told them to fuck off.
Yeah, I would say, back off. Okay,
and that's the way that I was brought up, is that we have rights and we have, civil liberties, and we don't have to do shit. But migrants don't have that. It's like this constant fear that they're in of authority.
I don't understand why. Why is that fear? Like I was at the Toitu Te Aroha rally, which they held for the Sikh parades that were stopped by that group. So they held a unity rally in town, and I had done a speech there, and a couple of there was a big number of Europeans, Māoris, Pacifica community there. They came to me. They said, "Sure, the way you spoke, we hardly see Indians talk like that." And I'm like, "Yeah," and that's what I try telling my crew or my community, that you have the right to. It's your right to speak up.
Yep.
It's your right. If you know you're getting treated unfairly, like you said, if you're a passenger, why the hell is that police officer asking for your license or documentation? He or she shouldn't have been asking that.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we end this podcast, Alastair,
but on that theme, I've got one question I want to ask you.
Yep.
All right, so you answer this question for me, because I don't know the answer. You mentioned earlier on about this campaign I did for Daman Kumar, right? Now, Daman Kumar was Indian parents. He was born in New Zealand. He was raised as a New Zealander. He is 18 years old. His whole life is in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. I did a lot of public campaigns in the news media, and I got a lot of comments from people about whether or not he should be allowed to stay. Now, the vast majority of the comments from people of a migrant background were negative. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of the comments from Kiwis, like myself, Pākehā Kiwi, was positive. Why? Why were migrants not coming out and supporting someone like that? Why was it the Kiwis who came out and said, "This is terrible. This kid's a Kiwi kid. We have to help him," while so many of the migrants were saying, "Well, his parents broke the law, so he should be deported."
To be continued.
Can you answer this question for me?
Look, I honestly don't have an answer for that, Alastair. That is my frustration. Every time we pick a case, even I can give you an example of an exploited migrant, if I'm representing them or if they've won their case and I'm interviewing them, it's the locals here, they're supporting it. They're like, "Well done, chap, you fought for your rights." But on the other hand, our own people are pulling them down. "Oh, you shouldn't have mentioned your employer's name," or why? Yeah. And I'm like, why is this happening? It's a big, fat, red question mark.
Is this just the Indian community, or is it all migrant communities?
I can only base my comment on the Indian community because I affiliate a lot with the Indian community. But I know this happens a lot in other communities too. I've shared some scenarios, and I remember one of my Pacifica brother. I asked him. I said, "Bro, look, with Daman's case, I was like, because we were in touch with Daman for many years with the family, and we've been supporting them for quite some time." And I said, one of my Pacifica brothers said, I said to him, I said, "Look, bro, it's our own people putting these negative comments," and he's like, "Oh, brother, it's not just your community." And that's, he's like, "It's not just yours. It's the same everywhere." But it is disappointing. And I think there's a lack of solidarity. There's a lack of knowledge. There's a lack of education. There's just a lot of weaknesses in the Indian community. I'm just being open that there is a lot of weaknesses and we need to work. But for some odd reason, there are a lot of people in my community that do not believe in solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
Here for many years I've been preaching. All I've been saying is, come on, guys, we need to unite, regardless of whatever this person is going through. Let's support them. And it's heartbreaking when I see people from New Zealand standing in support of a migrant worker, yet people from that same community or their ethnicity are less in numbers.
Yeah.
So it's very disappointing, and this is another reason why I've made this platform, so people like yourself can come here and be straight up and say, hey guys, like, this is not fair. Like, we have to work together. You might have seen, like, I always talk. We'll touch base on one more thing before I leave you. Like I always mention about our community leaders. Like I always say, we need support. We need support, and we lack in that support. And I'm still saying it. The reason I'm saying it is because we do lack in that support. It is when we, like, in Filipino community, I'm going to give you a scenario. If they're running a campaign, everybody is there from, like, everybody is there from their churches, their unions. Everybody just comes and stands there in solidarity. And that is the one dream I want. Like, I want my community representatives. I want those who have shown this government that we represent this community. I want them to come and support us.
Absolutely. And things will change overnight because it's a huge vote. The Indian vote is a huge vote. Chinese vote's a huge vote. If all the Indians got together in solidarity and said, enough, we want changes, it'll change overnight.
And that is what I'm trying. That's what I'm trying to say for the past 7 years. I say, guys, there are, like, even Ricardo, he mentioned about the English level, the score. That it's an easy fix. The immigration minister can fix this overnight, he said.
Yep.
But it's not happening because that pressure is not building.
Yep.
So, Alastair, I just want to thank you for taking out your precious time and, coming along and giving your time to educate my community and answering these questions. But just before I let you go, what is your last message you can give to the viewers?
Two things. If you're interested in the sorts of things that I'm talking about, come and have a look at my website and my Facebook pages. Just look under my name, look for AM Law. And on my website, I have lots of blogs where I talk about the politics of immigration. I talk about the economics, philosophy of immigration, all sorts of stuff. Come and have a look. Second thing is, even if you can't vote yet, if you're not a resident or a citizen, go out and support those politicians who actually believe and understand what's happening with the migrants here. And in particular, Ricardo Menendez March from the Green Party is an absolutely awesome advocate for migrant rights in this country. Get out there and support him, help him. If you can't vote, at least go and help Ricardo and volunteer your time to deliver pamphlets or to talk to people. Because when you get someone like Ricardo in Parliament who has the ability to do something about policy and the laws, things are going to get a hell of a lot better.
Yeah. I totally second that. And I love Ricardo. I just love Ricardo's work towards migrant communities. He's always there,
and he's the first one we've had who's really understood what migrants are going through.
Yes, and he's been on the bedside with the migrant worker who got beaten up in the kebab shop. He was there with us and next to his bedside. So yeah, we'll definitely support him, and I'll definitely invite him once again during this year, before elections. Thank you, Alastair.
Thanks for having me here. I love talking about these subjects. I could talk for hours on this.
I'll call you back. Don't worry. I'll definitely call you back. So we'll have you once again on this platform, and we'll just
closer to the election. Let's talk about some immigration policies closer to the election.
Definitely. Those small changes. I really want to touch on those small changes you mentioned because we don't want New Zealand turning into America.
Well, I gave submissions to the Parliamentary Select Committee on this, and I've done 2 interviews on Radio New Zealand about it recently, trying to get mainstream media to take some interest in it. There's a very small handful of lawyers who are raising their voices about this. There's Pooja Sundar, Stuart Daly, a couple of others, Stuart Graham, I think is his name. There's a very small handful of immigration lawyers who are trying to raise the alarm, but unfortunately, the vast majority of immigration advisors and immigration lawyers out there are just interested in the money and how much money they can make out of migrants, and that's why you never hear them saying anything about politicians or about immigration policy, because for them, it's just a business.
It's just a business.
The happiest day I'll be is when that I'm out of business, where I don't have to do anything anymore, because every migrant gets residency and citizenship, and then I have no more work to do, and then I can retire and go to the garden. I'll be happy.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much, Alastair.
Thanks very much. Great talk
Thank
to
you. You have a good night. Thank you.
All right.
So there you have it, Mr. Alastair McClymont. Very vocal, very open and honest about what's happening in the migrant world in the Parliament House. Okay, I always say that we are here to support you outside of the Parliament, but people like Alastair, people like Ricardo, they are there to support us in that Parliament House. They are there to guide us with these policies. But for us to build the pressure, we need that one thing, which is unity. Without unity, we can just keep talking and talking. We won't be able to achieve anything. So this is the second podcast I've had where 2 of my guests have openly just spoken about unity. Ricardo, he said, look, the only way we can sort action or sort immediate action is by unity. So like I said, we are having a meeting next week. We've got all the migrant organizations coming together and we're going to be meeting up. There's also some other public meetings that are happening. I will also share that on my Facebook page and on my YouTube page. Please support this page, this YVWS. I've launched this just for you. I've launched this so I can bring people like Alastair, people who can support our movement. There's a QR code. You can scan that, share it with your family, share it with your loved ones, and subscribe to this channel, support it. And if you want to share your story, if you've got a story you want the migrant community or anyone, put migrant community aside, you want people of New Zealand to hear the story, come along. Send me a text message on my phone number 021 0265 2248, or flick me a message on Facebook and we can connect and you can bring your story to this platform. I just want to thank everyone for watching, and apologies if I did not cover your comments, because the comments that were coming through, they were similar. So Alastair had already answered those, so hence I didn't display it on the screen. So thank you very much. Once again, have a safe night. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.